Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto manga chapter speculation discussion. So this is going to be my speculation as we head into chapter 77, which is coming out on, I believe, January 19th. So a day before we usually get it. We usually get the chapters on the 20th, but I believe this one is scheduled for the 19th. So that means we are 1 week away from the chapter coming out. So, we're going to base our speculation, of course, on what we got from last chapter, chapter 76. Because at the very least, as you can see on screen here, there was one thing that I just completely missed and I forgot to mention in my last, my review for chapter 76. And so getting straight into this one, the one thing I didn't mention is the one panel towards the end of the chapter where Shikamaru just randomly mentions, like he's trying to call Team E as well as Nishi. And mentions that, wait, you guys are late reporting in. Like, where are you? What are you doing? And then they just left it because he immediately went to talk to, via the mind kind of transfer jutsu stuff, whatever. He went to talk to Sumire and Sarada about the whole Ada situation. But this is somewhat interesting because this is probably the most heavy tease that we've got so far. That Code, who we know is basically on his way. He has his army, he's heading out basically. This is probably the biggest sense that we have that Code might actually already be sort of on the scene here at the Leaf Village, ready to take his revenge. Because if he's potentially taken out Team E and Nishi as like sort of people guarding the outskirts of the village, reporting intel, this means that he might be able to actually make a proper surprise strike on the village, which I think is probably what we're building up to, because chapter 76, I believe, was a volume opening chapter. So when it's collected in a volume, it will be the first chapter in that book. So we're going into a second one, meaning that we're building up to something big happening in basically the fourth chapter in this volume. So that would be chapter 79, I believe. So that's kind of what we're heading towards. And I feel that's probably what makes the most sense, is that chapter 77 and 78 will probably be more of the similar stuff that we got in chapter 76. Hints at some of the bigger plots, but for the most part we are going to be focused on just a lot of the kind of character drama surrounding Boruto, Kawaki, Ada, and maybe a little bit of Amado in the background. That's what we're going to be doing. And then I think right as everything kicks off, that's maybe when Code will attack, because it feels like he has to attack either this volume or next volume, because we are still waiting to get to a time skip, which we assume is still happening relatively soon. And so I don't think they can keep things like just, you know, moving along super slowly for that long. Because again, chapter 75 was an incredible chapter because it revealed so much and sort of teased the future for like one of the first times in a while. So we have to get to that stuff, I think, eventually. So we can't spend too long here. So ultimately, I think for 77, I think it's going to be somewhat similar to 76. But there are some interesting things going on. I'm wondering, like, with regards to this thing of just like Code, how much Code content will we get here? I have a feeling we probably won't see much of Code until he literally strikes. I don't really see the point in maybe like cutting over to him and revealing that like, oh, there he is, until the actual attack comes in. At least that's my thoughts on it. And that's why they're doing a little bit more of a subtle setup with Team E and Nishi being late to report in. Now, does that mean they're killed, captured? I'm not sure. But if they have been killed, that is definitely the setup for Code being on the way here, which I think is bound to happen at some point, because I think we need some action to make the characters kind of commit to making some decisions and so on. And you wonder in that situation, like, how's Ada and Demon going to react to that, where they've just arrived at the Leaf Village, they're technically allied, but it's not super concrete yet what exactly is going on. Ada's not a fighter, so what way is Demon going to handle things in all of this? Because, like, we know Code is basically... I think the implication seems to be that Code is both entranced by Ada and her powers, but also seems to, I think, actually like her as well. So he probably isn't super inclined to attack her in the first place. So we'll see what happens there. But anyway, moving away from that, one of the other things we learned is that Kawaki's hatred seems to have shifted from specifically the karma itself, more towards the Otsutsuki as a group, who are the reasons why he actually has the karma in the first place. And this is really interesting because considering the cliffhanger at the end of chapter 76 is Kawaki confronting Boruto and basically confronting Momoshiki of just like, come on out, Momoshiki, like we know you're in there, basically like talking to Boruto. So this is interesting because you kind of think about like how much does everyone in the village, basically all the key people, how much do they know about the whole Momoshiki Boruto thing? They know Momoshiki's in there, but since Boruto's death and recovery, their assumption has been that Boruto's relatively safe from Momoshiki because he can't take over, so I guess that means Boruto's just in control. Because they don't, I think, directly know that what's going on with Boruto is that Momoshiki can like talk to Boruto like in his head. So I'm assuming that reveal is going to have to come out to everyone. And the reaction of all the characters to the idea that, wait, Momoshiki is like consistently talking to you and like you're having conversations about things, that's kind of ominous for a manipulative character like Momoshiki. And Kawaki, we know he hates Otsutsuki. He's not going to like that. He's going to want to try and do something to fix Boruto in some way. Ada might also take issue to the fact that, wait, like there's an actual Otsutsuki inside you as well, kind of potentially influencing Boruto's actions. It might make people be much more cautious around Boruto. Obviously, they already were in the first place, but now, in a different way because, okay, he can't properly take over you, but he can speak to you whenever he wants, pretty much. That's interesting. And that kind of seems to maybe be where they're heading with the whole, those blue eyes will take everything from you, in that, are they going with maybe the idea that, like, literally just Momoshiki being there is enough to kind of turn people against Boruto? This is where we'll have to wait and see what exactly they choose to do with this in terms of how heavy of a reaction is Kawaki going to have to this? How heavy of a reaction is Ada going to have to this reveal coming out? And then will Boruto even like tell the full truth about what's going on here and so on? Because you get into a lot of the other Momoshiki stuff, which I'll get to in a second, but like Boruto could theoretically be getting information from, Momoshiki that he has to reveal publicly, but the only way he can actually reveal how he knows it is to confirm that he is talking to Momoshiki. So, that is a big thing in all of this, is just, how intense this is. I think the fact that he basically said the idea of like he wants to protect like Naruto basically from the Otsutsuki is a really, really key point in terms of where Kawaki's like allegiances are going to be going forward. But anyway, Akebi's resurrection. So again, this is the whole reason that Kawaki even has the karma mark at this point, is ultimately Amado's plan to get his daughter back via, actual god level jutsu that can actually do something like this. Divine powers, effectively. When is this happening? I'm really surprised that we haven't made any real move to like, oh yeah, we can do this like whenever. Like we don't even know what the full plan necessarily is. We know what like the technique involved is, but obviously there's a ton of questions that still need to play out with regards to this that I think I mentioned in my speculation ahead of the previous chapter about like, well, okay, if it's an Otsutsuki stuff, it's effectively using the karma power, but because Kawaki is in this kind of weird situation where like he's actually sort of like immune from the karma thing, where he can't technically do that fully himself. How is this going to work? Like, again, there's this theoretical idea that like, what if this is some subtle way where like Kawaki will be lost in all of this, where like this is a way to use the karma to basically transfer Otsutsuki powers from someone to someone else by like, someone else taking over the kind of karma mass of power or something like that. It's kind of complicated because, of course, both Kawaki and Boruto are both sort of like unique examples of Otsutsuki's with regards to the type of karma they have and the current situation that they're in. But there's also that sense where like they are just a lot of the times framing Amado as just like a father doing what he can to try and get his daughter back, but they are also still teasing some other motivation, as in like he is lying or holding back information about certain things. And why, now that this is meant to be his big truth reveal, why are they doing that when, you know, he should just be open about everything? Now, the main thing he seems to be holding back on is what Ada's charm ability actually is. And then in the same chapter, Momoshiki seems to have figured out what this ability is. So that suggests that on the outside, the way that he hears this ability as working, the way he's seeing it work, didn't immediately register to him as being one of these specific abilities he knows an Otsutsuki can have, one of these divine jutsus. But I guess he now has figured out that, wait, this is at least part of the way this ability works, or it's like a unique way of using this ability. That, I think, kind of is probably what has to be the reveal here, is that probably this ability is maybe more dangerous than we think it is. And Ada, just with the way her character is, ends up using that ability in like a weird way. And so this is actually going to be a pretty interesting one. And sort of, I think that I'm speculating that like the way this ability seems to work is that it's like charm, but based on kind of love and romance. But because her character like arc is sort of about wanting to have true friendships and true romances, what if that's just forced the ability to work that way? What if it is more of a just direct, like kind of like mind control, mass mind control jutsu that, because of her attempting to suppress it in some way, only works in a very, very specific way? I'm wondering, is that going to maybe be kind of part of what the reveal is there? But I'm just fascinated to see why he's holding back on this and what exactly the details are. Because it's weird, because if it is revealed that like Momoshiki actually recognizes it as an ability, that suddenly actually means that, wait, Amado isn't lying. It's just maybe he didn't know exactly what that ability was and how exactly it works, but was he trying to maybe engineer the ability to work in that specific way for some reason? We don't really know. We do get this. I don't think there's too much to say here, but it is interesting that one of the first things Kawaki says to Ada is that he basically figures out that, oh, you were allied with Code, and the only way that that worked, if you like love me, is that you were going to sacrifice Boruto to the Ten Tails. And she effectively has to admit that that is the truth. So he knows that like she is in all of this sort of really only out for herself. And the only thing she really seems to care about in the village is perhaps Kawaki. So she's not going to show the same care for Boruto, for Naruto as other characters, which could be interesting in terms of how things play into this. Especially with regards to like if Ada reacts to Boruto and the Momoshiki connection stuff badly. But anyway, the other one, and probably the most interesting one to speculate on, is this. Sarada and Sumire seem to not be affected by Ada's charm, but have to play along since they may be the only ones capable of taking Ada out if required. Sarada does seem to empathize with Ada's struggles of never having true friends or romance because of her ability. And so there's this weird situation where she seems to kind of honestly want to try to be Ada's friend, but she also has to kind of force herself to be it. So it's this weird situation where like basically Sarada and Sumire are both actually capable of being true friends to Ada, but because of the crazy situation surrounding Ada, they also have to like fake being friends with her, but out of a sense for the mission rather than her power activating. So I'm wondering, like over the course of probably like the upcoming chapter 77 and then 78, Are they going to like address this where like Sarada and Sumire do actually grow to like care about Ada as an actual friend, and so potentially them needing to kill her because they're potentially some of the only ones capable of doing it, is an interesting arc to kind of go on. Because when you do look at just the raw characterization of Ada, yes, there's sort of this commanding kind of like in control of the situation aspect of her, but fundamentally she is completely driven by wanting to have real friends, and more specifically her focus seems to be on having a true romance, specifically with Kawaki, because she did also in the chapter basically say that Boruto is too young for her. So Kawaki is the only one who really matters. But also this friendship aspect might come into play here quite heavily. So I'm interested to see where they go with that, because I think this is probably the bit of the arc that a lot of people are kind of viewing as being maybe boring. They don't like the focus on sort of teen drama here with what's going on here. The kind of girl talk scene that we had in the last chapter. But I think that's actually some of the stronger Ada character development that we need to have. That it's a weird arc for basically such an important and powerful character to have. But that's the only thing that keeps her from basically being a character who is technically capable of like controlling entire cities, I suppose, effectively with her powers. And this is where you kind of wonder, when the true reveal of what that ability is comes out, what is it actually going to be? And, you know, if she purposefully attempts to use her ability and not it just sort of happening by default, can she actively, purposefully focus her powers to do something? And in that sense, can she fully control people? That's going to be the really interesting part of this, because she can choose when to use her kind of Senrigan, her kind of omnipotence sort of like power. But it seems like the other ability is just on by default. So can she focus it at all? Interesting to think about. So then the big question comes up is, why are they not affected by her charm? Because this has been a big deal that they've set up to now. The only people who this doesn't apply to are blood relatives, which is why it doesn't affect Demon, and Otsutsukis, which is why it doesn't affect Boruto or Kawaki or other Otsutsukis. So the one I saw a lot of people in the comments on my review and online saying was just this one that I found very difficult to get behind, is that saying is that because basically Sumire and Sarada both have a crush or technically love Boruto, who is an Otsutsuki, that's why they're both unaffected. And I was struggling to see the logic here necessarily, because it's like, what are we trying to say here? Is that, like, you know, in a scene where Boruto's not present, their feelings for him can, like, basically cancel out Ada's powers. So that would imply that thoughts about an Otsutsuki have some sort of a power to them, or love in association with an Otsutsuki and thinking about them has some sort of a power. I find that one really difficult to think about, especially because Boruto is relatively oblivious to the feelings of the two of them, and if there is any Otsutsuki cancellation thing coming into play, it would, I think, be more directly coming from the Otsutsuki side of things, which is from Boruto. But he doesn't seem to really be involved in this equation as such. So what if it's this more along this side of things? What if it's just that people who are in love are less affected? In that if this ability is literally basically forcing people to fall for Ada, what if people who are already in love are just less affected by it because kind of true love is more powerful than this false, fake, forced love? This would explain why Shikamaru can fight her power in the way that he does. He's still, like, affected by it, but he can fight through it because he loves Tamari. We did see a scene where Sai was taken over for a bit and seemed to be a little bit more on the head over heels kind of thing, but it was a very short scene and he didn't really get too much time with her. She just moved on from there. His love for Ino should have allowed him to fight, and then there's probably a few other examples where maybe another character who is technically, we know, in love should have been, like, immune to the power in some way. My idea and my theory is more that like it's about the bloodlines and family connections. So in the same way that it makes sense how like an Otsutsuki who's like a powerful being is immune, powerful bloodlines and powerful families also help to achieve some level of immunity. We know the ability doesn't work on Otsutsuki, and we know the reason people in Naruto have chakra is basically because of the Otsutsuki. And in some families' cases, it is a pretty direct bloodline connection to actual Otsutsukis. Sarada, as an Uchiha, would be somewhat strongly connected back to Otsutsuki, given that Otsutsukis have, like, Sharingans and Rinnegan's. That's like the root of where those abilities come from, and why a clan still effectively having that jutsu that in certain cases is capable of like evolving into literally the one that they have is a very, very notable bloodline connection straight back to Otsutsukis. So I think for Sarada, that actually I think makes quite a lot of sense. That would also imply that Sasuke would be immune as well. And then on the other family connection side of things, Naruto should also technically be immune as well, given that he's an Uzumaki, and we know there's the whole Uzumaki Senju connection, and they also connect back to like the other side of like the Otsutsuki line, and that would make sense as well. Sumire, on the other hand, is less kind of clear and obvious about what's going on here, because I don't think her family line we know is directly related back to this, but her abilities seem to have a connection to it ultimately, because Nue, which is a summoning thing associated with the kind of tattoo thing she had in her back, the Gozu Tenno, that like her father had, and again, you have to watch those early episodes again to get this connection again, which was only in the anime. Like, they never said this in the manga necessarily. So anyway, but if you remember back to this, there was a connection here because basically the idea of this ability was compared back to a Kaguya technique that was super close to the way it actually works. And then Nue is also basically some sort of a connection to Hashirama cells. Again, I don't even particularly remember the in crazy details of this myself, but involved in all of this somewhere was Hashirama cells and some sort of comparison to the Otsutsuki. And if Hashirama Senju cells are involved, then there is an obvious Otsutsuki connection, because Senju clan is connected to the Otsutsukis, of course, which is why the whole, how, like, say, Madara got the Rinnegan was he's an Uchiha plus the other side of the clan line, and yeah, that's how he got that. So, that explains how she would theoretically have a certain amount of, Otsutsuki power, associated with her to be immune. But we'll see what direction they go in. I get why people kind of maybe don't want this one, the sort of like the power of love, but I think it fits to a certain degree if the power is actually related to kind of characters' feelings and specifically love and that sort of thing, attraction. This one here, where it's like specifically like because they love an Otsutsuki, and it's more of the fact that like they are, connected to an Otsutsuki, I find that one difficult to buy unless they give an explanation for it to actually properly make sense, that like Boruto somehow through this connection is protecting them from her abilities. I don't really know, but that's kind of where we're at with that. So the problem here, I suppose, going into the chapter, is that in some ways Boruto in a way is a very unpredictable manga. You never really know if this is going to be a chapter that will deliver everything you expect, or if like they could absolutely just go into the next chapter and be like, oh yeah, we haven't gone back to code for a while, here's a nearly complete code chapter that you really weren't expecting, and you're just kind of like, huh? And it's not necessarily in like in the good way that you typically like stuff to be a little bit like you can't predict it. It's just borderline random. Like in the way we went from chapter 75, which was such an amazing lore chapter, and then we almost completely forgot about everything that chapter did as we went into 76, was weird. So it does have a bit of a reputation, this series, for just kind of like curveballs that aren't even like that incredible. But I don't think code is going to come into play this early in a volume. So I think they will focus a little bit more on what is their new dynamics, which is Ada now has two girlfriends in Sarada and Sumire. So we're going to have to establish them getting closer to each other. There's going to be more Ada Kawaki time. We have to, of course, address the confrontation from the end of the previous chapter, which, of course, was the confrontation. He confronts Boruto about speaking to Momoshiki. What's going to come out of that? And then, we're expecting Momoshiki at some point in the next chapter or two, we assume, to actually speak again and reveal what Ada's charm ability is, which could tell us something about her maybe having other motivations, or Amado actually having some secret motivations as well. Because the one other thing with Akebi is that he specifically, the one thing he asked of Amado is, just tell me that when we do this, basically, that you are not basically resurrecting Akebi to be an Otsutsuki. That if we do this, I will not be responsible for basically creating another Otsutsuki who is super, super powerful. Which he says isn't the case, and Ada seems to confirm that Akebi as a person is just a normal girl based on what she knows. So I don't know what to make of that, because obviously Amado is still this very interesting, ominous in some ways character. We have to wait and see what happens here. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are. What are your speculations for the upcoming chapter, chapter 77? What do you think is going to happen? What will be the focus? Will there be any surprises? And what do you think about what I had to say about it? But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.